and you are still watching our special coverage of the Iowa caucuses. This is day 2. We are covering the ROKFIN on the ROKFIN platform, these caucuses, these primaries. Next week, the whole crew will be in New Hampshire. But before we wrap things up in Iowa, if we're going to talk about election fraud, we got to talk about one of the best specialists. He's no stranger to it whatsoever. I think he faced it twice. And I'm almost positive if it had been a fair election in 2016, the world would have been rid of the power of a Debbie Wasserman Schultz. With us today on the couch, my man Tim Canova is here with us. How you doing, Tim?
Hey, Greg. Doing well, thank you.
It's great to see you. I hear you're back teaching again.
I am indeed. I'm back in the classroom and enjoying it quite a bit.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I have a couple friends that went to your classes back in the days, and they say you were just an amazing professor. And I just thought it was great because, like, you were one of my favorite candidates, and you still are if you ever jump in any type of race. I think your policies are great. I think you're just a great activist out there, and I'm glad you're carrying on the work of the election fraud, because coming from Florida, I'm no stranger to it. I've seen it quite a bit in my life. I've seen it in California. But last night, Tim, can you give us an overall analysis of what you saw take place in Iowa?
Well, I wasn't studying it that closely, but what I did see was somewhat chilling. I mean, it really reminded me of a lot of what we have already discovered in our 2 races against Wasserman Schultz. And the funny thing is, just a couple of days earlier, I was saying, it's very tough to steal a caucus. And it's tough to steal a caucus because the very nature of a caucus is you vote in public and your vote is counted in public. And that takes away a lot of opportunity
for
an election outcome. When
Absolutely.
You vote in a primary, well, you're not voting in public and your vote is usually being counted by a computer. Here in Florida, you fill out your ballot and the ballot is passed through an electronic scanning machine. And those scanning machines actually have wireless cellular modems on them.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of opportunities for an outside hacker or for an insider to manipulate the software. And we're absolutely convinced it happened to us twice against Wasserman Schultz. There were experts in computational science who studied all the election results. The first time they said our election results were mathematically implausible. The second time they said they were mathematically impossible. So it seems pretty clear they rigged the software and then they threw out the ballots when we tried to inspect the ballots. So there was no way to oversee it. So I'm expecting in some way for Iowa to be, perhaps Bernie Sanders is surging. He's going to get a big kick out of there going into New Hampshire. And then what do we hear? We hear that the state of Iowa, the Democratic Party in Iowa, has adopted a new mobile app. And the moment I heard that, you didn't
That's
have to
it.
say anything else. I knew there's a problem here now. And, I don't have to tell you the details. They had different conflicting results. They wanted to figure out which were the right results. They claim that the app had not been hacked. How do they know if it's been hacked or not?
Yeah.
Once you have a mobile app that you're using, with the stakes so high, I mean, the Iowa caucus is rather high stakes to say the least. You've got bad actors who now have the means, the motive, and the opportunity to mess with the election results. And who knows what their end game was. As I read about this app and the characters who were behind it.
I know.
Mook, right? Robbie Mook, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager. Mitt
Obama.
Romney's campaign manager was involved.
Yeah.
A company called Shadow.
Yes.
Funded by Democratic Party, super PAC, dark money.
Yes. And Pete Buttigieg.
And that's right. Buttigieg.
And Buttigieg.
Shadow, okay.
Yeah.
And then the one other connection that was very interesting was that Robbie Mook was on an Atlantic Council type of a think tank at Harvard University that was partially funded by the CEO of CrowdStrike.
I know.
Okay. So you've got the whole list of bad characters in there. If they're going to try to rig something, those are the characters you'd expect would try.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
they come up with an app only 2 months ago, wasn't well tested. All the alibis that it was mistakes, not an intentional, um, you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I
intentional.
know. It's
Now, even if it was just mistake after mistake, look how it affected Sanders.
yeah.
Sanders didn't really get to give the one sole victory speech. Other candidates gave their pseudo victory speeches first. Bernie doesn't get the kick out of Iowa, the momentum, the media coverage that he would have had the results come in timely with him winning.
Yep.
Now, did he win or not? I mean, I'm really just got back from school a little while ago and trying to catch up. And it seemed like it was neck and neck between him and Buttigieg.
What had happened was yesterday, it was neck and neck. Buttigieg got out to a little bit of a lead, and as soon as Bernie Sanders went ahead with less than 2% of the vote, all of a sudden, that's even when, now here's the mainstream media playing the part. They're not going to update the results because there's unclear and there's murky waters and there's questions about the vote, so they put a halt to it. But conveniently, Tim, they put a halt to it before they announced that Bernie Sanders had taken the lead.
Right.
Today, the same thing had happened. CNN went back on. They started showing results. Once again, they had the picture of Buttigieg up, and then they stopped updating the numbers when Bernie Sanders has the lead. So not only do they just, how they've the complete nefariousness of what they did to this election, but they put this image up where the everyday people see Buttigieg's name first place and Bernie Sanders second.
That's right.
So,
yeah. And some of what I was reading on social media, and it's anecdotal, you don't know exactly what's true and what's not. Somebody claimed that the app was doing a number of strange things. First of all, some of the precinct leaders who were supposed to report their results were not able to access the app. They had a helpline where you could dial in, make a phone call to get help if you're having trouble with the app. That phone line was also the same line they were using for precinct leaders to telephone in the results. And some of those folks were waiting an hour.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Okay. Another thing I read was that somebody became suspicious when 200 votes for Klobuchar were transferred by the app for Buttigieg. Now, I wasn't there. Is this BS or is it true? My attitude is, why would you believe anything when it's a black box?
Yeah.
When the votes are being counted or transferred or reported by some kind of an electronic device that's inherently vulnerable to outside hacking or insider manipulation.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question. Did you hear about the Bernie app? And I mean, what are your thoughts, your initial thoughts? I mean, listen, I've been very critical of the campaign. I think there's a big disconnect between the campaign and the grassroots. And I don't say that to rub dirt in their face. I'm hoping that they can repair this, really, from up top, Jeff Weaver, Chuck Rocha. However, yesterday's move of having their own app which was kept in the dark, it was kept quiet, and to be able to back it up and show the actual results where Nina Turner and Jeff Weaver can call the Democratic Party into play. I mean, you got to say that's, Tim, that's somewhat of a great move. Now, no?
I think it's an important attempt. I don't know if it accomplished anything. If votes were really transferred from Klobuchar to Buttigieg or from anyone to Buttigieg, did the Sanders team figure that out on their app? If the Sanders team app, if their results from the app they used was different from the official results with Robbie Mook's app, I haven't heard about that divergence. If it had been a divergence, what's Sanders prepared to do? Call for a recount? I doubt it.
Yeah.
Contest the official results out of Iowa? I doubt it. If the Sanders team had not kept their app in the dark and had publicized it, well, then that app becomes a target for bad actors. There's probably a good dozen or 24 organizations in this country, from U.S. intelligence agencies to big tech corporations, that probably have the ability to hack into almost anything, including Bernie Sanders' app. So, I think these are second best, third best, fourth best solutions. What bothers me is it's been 4 years now since the 2016 election. 4 years of relative silence, not just by Bernie Sanders, but by the entire progressive and Democratic left, I think,
Yeah.
about the real nature of the rigging in this country. The rigging that occurred in 2016. I don't have to tell you, a dozen states where Bernie Sanders wins in the exit polls, but conveniently loses on the official electronic voting machine.
Yeah.
That's 4 years to hold hearings, to shine a spotlight on it, to do something about it. Squandered. Instead, what'd they do with 4 years? A Mueller investigation, $30 million, 40 FBI agents, 20 Justice Department lawyers for a big fat nothing burger. And now doubling down with impeachment about Ukraine, where it looks like there's a lot more Democratic corruption in Ukraine than Trump corruption in Ukraine. Okay?
Yeah.
These investigations have been part of the cover-up. It suits the needs of the Democratic establishment for Democrats, for its constituents around the country, to not be asking those questions and not be pointing the fingers at Democratic corruption within the Democratic nomination process.
Okay. So, Tim, listen, I have a dream one day that we can vote online. Really, I mean, I know it's a tough one to swallow today and to think it's probable because we know how computers are, so at the very least, I think if we're going to use computers, it has to be an open source system. However, I am almost in the camp that says that at the end of the day, we need a paper backup and we need to count ballots. And counting ballots by hand is, the best way. But then you come to the caucus situation. And now you just said it. It's hard to cheat a caucus because humans are there. You know what I'm saying? The human element. But now all three phases of these elections are obviously being engineered by the establishment and the elites and stuff. At what point does Americans wake up and say enough is enough?
Well, in some ways it's already happened. When you look at 2016, 61 million people voted for Trump, 63 million for Hillary Clinton, and a plurality, 106 million Americans, 107 million Americans did not vote. Folks who were eligible to register and to vote did not vote. That means a plurality of this country has so little faith in the election system that they don't bother voting.
Exactly.
At what point is it rational to boycott elections if they're using these electronic voting machines? That's my question.
Yeah.
Are we supposed to be complicit in it all the time, uncertain whether our ballots are going to be counted, but somehow thinking the patriotic, proper thing to do is to fill out our ballots and to pass them through the scanning machines and somehow just have faith, have trust? Because why? Because there's no other strategy. We don't know what else to do. There needs to be a movement in this country to reform the election laws, to follow the lead of a dozen other major democracies in this world that ban the electronic voting machines and move to paper ballots counted in public by hand, like they just did in Great Britain, for their parliamentary elections, for their new government.
Yeah.
And what bothers me is that, again, the squandering of time.
Yeah.
In an effort not to so-called normalize the Trump presidency, every Democratic office holder has basically been forced to boycott Donald Trump. God forbid Bernie Sanders would go to the White House to actually have a discussion about healthcare or about election reform and paper ballots. And I don't just mean Bernie. I'm not picking on Bernie. I mean any Democrat at this point. And who are the Democrats who have gone to the White House to talk to Trump? Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and that's just about it. Anyone else who dares to speak with him, like Tulsi Gabbard did when he was president-elect, is then denounced for being a traitor, for talking, for speaking, for trying to negotiate. This is what politics is about. Yes, articulate your vision, work hard, fight hard for it. But at the end of the day, when you win an office, you've got to work with other office holders. 4 years to solve this problem. And now people are shocked that, Iowa might have been stolen. Bernie might have been robbed of a decisive victory in Iowa. They'll be shocked when voting machines are rigged in some other states now, or they suspect they're rigged. This is the problem. There's no way to have definite proof it's happening. You know that bad actors have the means, the motive, and the opportunity, but somehow we want to think they've got the civic virtue not to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I know. Tim, can you do me a
Like
favor? Can you lower your speaker a little bit? I'm so sorry. There's a
Yes,
bad echo. Can you lower your speaker a little bit?
yes.
I think there's an echo.
Let me try. Let
Do
me
you have
look
your
for
headsets by any chance or no?
I do have headsets. Whether they're going to work here with a microphone. Let's see.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
I
Can you
hear
hear me
you.
now? Can you hear me now?
No.
Can you hear
No.
me?
Let me try to lower the volume if there was an
All right,
echo.
yeah, it shouldn't be that bad if you lower it a little bit.
How's
And
that?
and let me just say this much that yeah, that is a what's that? A little
How's
bit
that?
lowered? Can you lower it a little bit?
If I do it lower, I won't hear you.
All right, hold on. Let's just do a technical check. One sec. Got a big echo. All right. Comes to Bernie Sanders, though, that is definitely a criticism I have. I think we've got the technical problems fixed. Okay, when it comes to Bernie Sanders, that is a criticism I have, Tim, and I got to tell you that much. And like, once again, I don't like to bag on Bernie, but I hate it when Bernie plays that he was the worst president of all time kind of crap that's signaling to that, like, I hate Trump base. Listen, I'm not a big supporter of Trump whatsoever, but when I hear that kind of rhetoric, and when I hear sometimes the rhetoric he has when he buys into the Russiagate narrative, it's
Yeah.
totally against what I want. I want you sitting down, like you said, having a conversation, about, peace and foreign policy, or having a
Great.
conversation about, God forbid, fixing our elections and getting them straight. I mean, I think at one point, if there was some type of mentality where a Democrat went and said, hey, you need to help us with our situation over here when it comes to our elections too as well. You're in the White House, our elections should be fair and free. But he'd rather sit back and watch the Democrats just explode.
If you do a Google search or any kind of search for Bernie Sanders will work with Trump, you'll find that on November 10th, 2016, on CNN, Bernie was being interviewed, and he said he was willing to work with the president on points they have in common and to oppose him on things they disagree with. What then happened to Senator Sanders? The DNC basically must have lowered the boom and said, no, you're going to go on a unity tour and you're never going to say a nice thing about Donald Trump and you're going to denounce him all the time. Well, I'll tell you something. It's not effective. It doesn't denormalize Donald Trump, really. And what it does, I'm afraid of, is it guarantees that if Bernie Sanders does somehow win the nomination and then the White House, it'll be a small victory. It won't be the kind of landslide that's needed for that big, ambitious, progressive agenda, which is one of the reasons I like Tulsi Gabbard in 2020 more.
Yeah.
Tulsi Gabbard has not gone into the vilifying of Donald Trump, calling him a racist and a misogynist and the most corrupt politician in American history. You start calling those names to the president, well, his supporters take it personally. You might as well call them deplorable.
Yeah.
And it makes it very tough to work with somebody if you're saying that they are more racist than what? Apartheid South Africa or something?
Yeah.
It doesn't ring true anymore anyway.
No, I agree. It never helps, and once again, you don't have to be a supporter, but you don't have to hate on the man. You could respect him in a way if you want to beat him. You should respect your enemy, or not your enemy in this case, your main opponent.
Respect the office.
Exactly. And that's the problem, that Democrats don't even they don't want to respect any institutions. They're willing to burn any institution down just as long as they can, vilify Donald Trump because they can't accept the fact that they lost to him before. Let's talk about the man Donald Trump today because of you, I watched the State of the Union. I stopped watching it after Obama. I call it State of the Circus. It's just let me just brag about everything I'm doing well and set the tone. But for what Donald Trump does here, he really knows how to just talk to his audience. He understands who he's talking to. I mean, they even did the thing today. You saw it where, what they do at halftime at football games or basketball games where they have the family there and then the veteran father comes behind and surprise. He did that today in the chambers. And I mean, the whole thing about it is the Democrats are so bad. He bragged about the economy, and he gets to brag about the economy. Why haven't the Democrats, or any Democrat, the ones who are, let's say, not so close or cozy to the establishment, attack him for the failure he really is on the economy? Instead, they'll say things like, despite Donald Trump's boom in the economy, he shouldn't be president because he's working with Putin. Why won't they attack him here? Only Sanders does.
Well, and it's interesting, in 2016, both Sanders and Trump on the campaign trails made the same point, and I was making this point, that the unemployment rate has become a fairy tale, a fiction, because so many Americans have effectively dropped out of the workforce. Discouraged workers who have given up on looking for work. Part-time workers who aren't considered unemployed, but they might have 2 or 3 part-time jobs without benefits, and they want a full-time job. It's truly a very weak labor market still. Is it stronger now than it was 4 years ago? Yeah, probably incrementally. You know, I see it with some of my friends, but it's incremental. It's not like a gigantic, what did Trump call it today? Blue collar boom.
Yeah.
You know, and the thing is, I do think that instead of the vilification and the conspiracy theories about Russia and Ukraine, the Democrats really should have spent these 4 years both working with him and attacking him on issues. Okay? And, you know, I think they're afraid to work with him on many issues. Let's say just infrastructure as an example. If you get a big infrastructure bill, problems start getting solved and people go to work, and they're afraid Trump will get the credit. And, you know, it's hard to make historical analogies because history never really does quite repeat itself the same way. But, you know, I think of somebody like Winston Churchill, a conservative, a Tory, very popular actually during World War II. And once the war's over, within a matter of months, I think, he lost his job. The British voters voted him out. And it wasn't a labor campaign vilifying him. It was just that he was a good wartime president. Now we have other problems to address. He's not the right guy for those problems.
Yeah.
Is it even possible to defeat Donald Trump with that kind of an agenda, as opposed to the constant impeachment? And look, first of all, I don't think there's much to the Mueller investigation and the impeachment. And secondly, it doesn't seem to be effective as a strategy.
Yeah.
You know, actually, I heard today, Trump's actually at his highest approval rating.
Absolutely.
Ever.
Yeah. These tactics are counterproductive. And the fact that he can sit there and say, look at the Democrats in Iowa. They're corrupt as can be. You want these people to run your country? They can't even run an election in Iowa. And also in trade, Tim, I mean, don't get me wrong, the jumping off point was NAFTA and a lot of these things, a lot of these areas where we started. And I don't think progressives could have expected like a big new deal when it came to trade that would really address climate change. But he held our farmers hostage for almost 2.5 years, and he got this for it. A little bit of something. He really didn't change or move the dial too much. And yet the Democrats don't punish him for that. They allow him to sit there and make it look like he had some great change in trade. And unless I'm missing something, I don't see it. Do you?
Well, I'll say this. You know, for 20 years or more, I've been a law professor. And among the areas I write about has been trade. And for a long time, I've been hoping for a president who would use tariffs, who would push for bilateral reciprocal trade agreements, move away from the multilateral trade agreements that really are a race to the bottom, and those investor right provisions that were in the Trans-Pacific Partnership and in all kinds of bilateral investment treaties. And of course, I was hoping that president would be a progressive on the left, like Bernie Sanders. If any other Republican had won, you'd have the TPP, you'd have NAFTA, you'd have no use of tariffs and bilateral trade agreements that has been the Trump strategy. So it's dangerous to say you applaud anything Trump does.
Yeah.
So let me not use the word applaud. But I do think it's a step in the right direction. unfortunately, they're kind of baby steps.
Yes.
Now, farmers were hit hard by the trade war with China. And yet, what did Trump do? He imposed steep tariffs that brought in tens of billions of dollars that he then started to direct to farm country. Now, I'd like to see some analysis. Did those monies go to family farmers or just the big corporate farms?
That's, yeah.
You know, it's questions like that that you count on Congress to hold hearings, to do legislative fact finding, to bring witnesses in, experts on both sides.
Yeah.
Hear the administration's view and hear critics of the administration.
Yeah. Yeah.
But can you remember any substantive hearings on legislation in the last 4 years?
Never. Not even on the thing he said tonight, Tim. What was it? The opportunity zones? The safe. It's like me and Johnny were listening to it and we're like, man, I'd like to get some analysis on that because he's really spinning that off. But our Congress isn't telling us that. Our Congress is telling us that Stormy Daniels is the reason why Donald Trump needs to be thrown out of office. And furthermore, what's really disgusting tonight during the State of the Union was seeing them applaud all the foreign policy, just awful decisions on foreign policy. And actually one of the worst foreign policy decisions, Juan Guaido standing up today inside the chambers and seeing people like Nancy Pelosi actually standing up. You want to talk about election integrity. We can't throw elections. That election in Venezuela and the elections before, I'm sorry, I believe they were good elections because I'm listening to the journalists who went there, who recorded those things, who showed how it is, how secure. If the Jimmy Carter Institute's going to say that these elections are better than our elections, that we're going to sit here and we're going to praise up a prop-up puppet like Juan Guaido, and Nancy Pelosi stands and applauds as we're sanctioning the hell out of the country and children are dying. And that's one of the reasons for migration in the first place, Tim.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about his education? What's that?
I noticed that too. Standing ovations on a lot of the foreign policy talk by Trump today.
Yeah, I mean, the Soleimani thing, they stand up, they applaud. You know, he was talking about like this woman, you know, who died. They had the parents there with the picture. And like literally, it was like
who had been tortured and killed by Baghdadi.
Yes, and I want to say, hey, it was your government who funded them. You know, it was like that's who you know. We talk about Operation Sycamore Timber or Timber Sycamore when the government, all these decisions that you know, the Democrats were even in the White House when we went in.
I was about to say, which government was funding ISIS?
Yeah,
Trump government or the Obama government?
The Obama government.
Yeah,
the Obama government. You know, I mean, Trump has his when it comes to the Idlib province, you know what I'm saying, he protected them too well. You know, he didn't let the Syrian army go in there and liberate Idlib. But that's beside the point. Once again, our government's been funding all sides, Tim. We know this, you know, all over the place. Soleimani was one of the number one killers of ISIS there, whatnot, you know. And I don't want to get into it. He's a bad guy. He's not a bad guy. But they literally were saying that this side was bad and that side was bad. They were painting both sides as murder. And the American people buy it because the Democrats will vote to impeach him in the House and yet then turn around and sign his defense budget bill and give him the money to go play and go crazy.
Give him something like $70 billion more than he asked for.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, he's supposed to be the greatest threat to world peace and stability ever. Yep. On the other hand, he gets almost a blank check.
Yep. What about the time he talked about, let's move on to education, because he really hit hard when he kept on saying choice. Choice. You're an educator. I mean, you know, that's like a signal to the charter schools that, hey, I got your back in a way.
It's true. You know, look, I've always been for revitalizing public education. And I talk about how John Kennedy, way back in 1960, campaigned on this. He talked about having the federal government subsidize local school teacher salary, the salaries of local school teachers. And I'm all for something like that. But look at the federal involvement in education today. Standardized testing, high pressure testing, core curriculum, which just teaches memorization. It doesn't teach creativity. It doesn't even teach a common history of this country, to tell you the truth. And these are failing public schools. they're not subsidizing local school teacher salaries. It's the opposite. You know,
Yeah.
they're putting mandates on local education without the resources. And on the campaign trail, it was an eye-opener to me. I look at the public schools in Broward County. Many of them are filled with mold and mildew. They're sick schools, sick buildings. They're not safe. And then I talk to parents, and quite often these are parents of African-American students who want the choice. So, you know, I've been evolving my view on this as well.
Yeah.
You know, I'd like to see a much greater investment in the public schools and enough of this standardized testing and core curriculum and all that, Common Core. But until you get that, how do you tell a poor family that they shouldn't have access to a private school?
Yeah.
You know, I think these are complicated, difficult questions. And, you know, what bothers me is it's always the vilification. It's a litmus test. If you don't follow the litmus test, it means you're not progressive anymore.
Yeah, yeah. No, I hear you, and I hate that attitude. You know, but also, too, I mean, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of questions when it comes. Once again, we should fix the public schools themselves. You know, there's a big loss of the arts there. And arts, you know, that promotes abstract thinking. If you don't have abstract thinking, we're gone. And, you know, that's by design. That's by design. So that, you know,
they've created prisons. You know, that's what these schools really are, with students who probably feel like they're on death row every day because you never know if there's going to be a mass shooting at your school. At least that's in their subconscious at the very least.
Yeah.
I went to public schools, K to 12, and they were very different when I went to public schools. There was music, there was art, there was shop classes of all kinds, there was physical education. There were not the same kind of standardized testing all the time.
Yeah.
You know, and the teachers where I grew up, public schools, they made enough of a living that they could live in our neighborhoods. They could raise families of their own on a teacher salary. You know, that's not the kind of public school system that exists in most parts of the country now, unfortunately.
Yeah. And you're in Florida, so, you know.
They're not good here.
No, not at all. Not at all. And you got Debbie Wasserman Schultz buying. And I don't know if I told you, it was not a private prison. It was a immigrant detention center that I was building. You got it wrong, Tim. Thank you. Also, Donald Trump.
That was Dirty Debbie.
That was Dirty Debbie. Hashtag Debbie won't debate. I remember that. So then Donald Trump, you know, once again, like I said, he knows how to speak to his people. He really, you know, he exploited the little girl there, you know, the people as props, I think was just, you know, the Space
Force. Every president's done it since Reagan.
I know. And that's why, you know, I stopped watching the State of the Union when Obama was the president. I'm like, I can't even watch these anymore. But Trump takes it to a whole nother level. The Space Force, too, it was just like, then he's got the kid who wants to one day be in the Space Force. Listen,
the Tuskegee Airman, who he's promoted to Brigadier General. You know, I'll tell you, I was interested in the theater of it because it really is a theater in many ways. And I thought, you know, with impeachment, the vote on whether to convict him or not is tomorrow. What's Donald Trump going to do? And, you know, you got to hand it to him. He didn't mention impeachment once. You know, he was more presidential in sort of rising above all of this rancor. Tomorrow he'll be back tweeting insults and, you know.
Yeah, I know. He put on the State of the Circus tonight. That's what I call that thing. Well, anyways, when it comes to Donald Trump, I think the Democratic Party has to realize, or the people who are voting for Bernie Sanders too, as well, is that Donald Trump's not going to be easy to beat this time. It's a big difference. He gets to walk around bragging about the economy when it's not true. He gets to walk around bragging about trade, which once again, it was a baby step. It wasn't like, and don't get me wrong, it was a step in the positive direction. And that is one area when it came to when Donald Trump got elected, I hoped he would do good, was trade and being a non-interventionist.
You know, foreign policy. He also mentioned that he has given paid family leave to federal employees.
Yes.
And that he signed the First Step Act, and he had somebody in the audience who was a prop for that.
Yep.
You know, so, you know, it's kind of mixed in some ways. He's going to have a record to run on. Of course, it'll appeal to conservatives, to those on the right, much more than those on the left. But there's still some months left. He might still be able to, who knows, withdraw troops from Afghanistan or do something like that to appeal to progressives. Who knows? Who knows who the Democrats are going to nominate? I mean, if they go ahead and make sure that Bernie Sanders doesn't get the nomination, which I would assume they're going to try.
Yeah.
Any of the other candidates might not stack up very well against Trump.
Yeah.
Well, I was very confident in 2016 that Bernie Sanders could have won that general election.
Absolutely.
But this is a different year. Trump has a record, and part of the record, I see this when I talk to folks. It doesn't matter if they're Democrats, Independents, or Republicans. There has been somewhat of a growing feeling for the past few months that the Democrats are just pushing it too hard in a divisive way on this impeachment stuff. You kind of thought that after the Mueller investigation failed, well, they're not going to apologize, but maybe they'll just turn a corner and start getting back to the real issues that matter to most people. And instead, they doubled down on impeachment.
Yeah.
And it's revealed a lot of Democratic corruption. So, these are the things that are somehow fueling Trump's favorability ratings.
Yeah. Listen, we have a terrible Congress. I mean, you have Debbie Wasserman Schultz over there. I got Adam Schiff right next door to me over here, and I'm telling you,
they're one of a kind, aren't they?
Really, to tell you the truth, the American people have to wake up, and especially if you're a Democrat, you have to realize that these people are not your friends, and we need to get rid of them. If Bernie Sanders does win the nomination, I think that he only has a shot if he picks the right vice president. I think that Hillary Clinton could have possibly beaten Donald Trump had she taken Elizabeth Warren at that time, who didn't have all the luggage that she now has on her today, which, Elizabeth Warren today and then 4 years ago was totally different. Had she picked Bernie Sanders as the vice, she might have won. We even have a clip of Donald Trump saying that the only person he didn't want to run against and the only person he didn't want Clinton to pick was Bernie Sanders. In your opinion, to win, who does Bernie Sanders need to have to pick to be his vice president?
Well, look, I'm a Tulsi Gabbard fan. Will Tulsi Gabbard be adding to his ticket or not? I don't think she's turns off a lot of independents and Republicans. So she's got that going for her. But, to me, it sounds a little like fantasy. There's a schism in the Democratic Party. And I don't think it's going to be papered over so easily. The party is still, for the most part, owned by the same big, powerful corporate interests. And Sanders is still perceived by them as an outsider, even though he went along on the narratives dealing with Russia and kept quiet on Julian Assange. And we can think of several other issues where he's been kind of a good, loyal Democrat. Campaigned hard for Hillary Clinton, has vilified Donald Trump. Doesn't matter. He's always going to be perceived as an outsider to the big insurance companies, fossil fuel industry. You could list the whole bunch of corporate interests that run the Democratic National Committee. And that hasn't changed. I think we have to be prepared for some serious rigging that's going to come down the pipe.
Yeah.
How is it going to be detected? How is it going to be exposed? How do you expose it when the corporate media is on their side? I'm not optimistic it's going to turn out well. And I hate to be the naysayer.
Yeah.
I really do. It'd be wonderful if, in a few months from now, we're really talking about Bernie Sanders has the nomination and who's he going to pick as a VP. I like Sherrod Brown from Ohio, but he's a white male, so, in picking a VP, Bernie's going to want some diversity on gender or race or both. Who knows? I still think Tulsi Gabbard kind of fits some of those.
Yeah. Well,
boxes.
She also, and look, and let's be honest here, because you're hitting it right on the nose. If in fact he can beat back the establishment, if it's such a big Bernie Sanders avalanche, will they even let him put Tulsi Gabbard on that ticket? You know what I'm saying? Like you talked about the isms and the big powerful money, but if you do put it on paper, I think a Tulsi Gabbard is one of the only options to beating Donald Trump, because she is the only one that will actually poach a vote away from Donald Trump and bring it over. And she gets a huge amount of libertarian votes who are now just disgusted with Donald Trump's foreign policy. So you're right. It's not that we just like her. I just think she is the right choice to get him over the top. I like Nina Turner, but once again, I don't know if she can get those people that Tulsi can get. And does she really take away from Donald Trump? Takes Elizabeth Warren, takes another establishment, whoever, and we are doomed.
And you know, this is a very different race from 2016 when it was Bernie against Hillary. You know, one-on-one. With only two in the race, it's a lot easier for somebody to lock up the race before the convention.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of money to keep candidates in the race, whether it's Bloomberg's own money.
Yeah, I know.
Corporate money behind Mayor Pete. And if I had to really make a prediction right now, I'd say that there's a good chance Bernie's going to go into the convention with the most delegates, with a plurality, but not with enough to win on a first ballot. And, you know, we're looking at maybe a brokered convention then.
Yeah.
So
well,
it's
that's
very
why
tough to ever predict the future in politics. And I think it's become only tougher and tougher this year.
Yeah, I hear you. But I mean, that's why I think a lot of what happens next week in New Hampshire means a lot, because we've said it before in this show. We'll say it again. Iowa picks corn. New Hampshire picks presidents. And it's an open primary, so you don't have to switch over. Now, listening, yesterday in Iowa, they had the ability to switch over from Republican to Democrat and go vote, but that's how bad the Democratic Party is going to be, is that they're like, I'm not even switching for one day to this damn party.
No, I heard Trump got a good turnout in Iowa, actually.
Ridiculous. Ridiculous. So before we get you out of here, last question. I heard you mention Julian Assange. Right now, his hearing's coming up. It's right around the corner. What could we expect, and what are you hoping for? Because I know you're a big Julian Assange guy. What are you expecting and hoping for right now?
Well, obviously hoping that the British court will not extradite him to the United States. And I have no idea what the prospects are for that kind of a ruling. If he is extradited to the United States, my hope is the Justice Department will work with him, will essentially grant him immunity or some kind of a soft deal if he will speak the truth. You know, and this goes to what I wanted to say. When the rigging becomes more apparent against Bernie Sanders, let's say, is one of the options of Bernie Sanders to be calling on the Justice Department, a Republican administration, to start investigating and clean up the election corruption that's happening in the Democratic Party? It's hard to imagine that. And yet that's what's been lacking. That's what's lacked here in South Florida.
Yeah.
We had ample evidence. I mean, we had an airtight open and shut case to give to federal prosecutors. We had Brenda Snipes, the supervisor of elections, admitting in a videotaped deposition that she destroyed the ballots. Those are felonies.
Yeah.
And we couldn't get federal or state prosecutors so far to do anything. There's still a year and a half left under the statute of limitations. Now, I'm hoping that, look, politics makes strange bedfellows. And yet, what should a Justice Department do? Regardless of whether it's Republican or Democrat, it should be investigating this kind of corruption. It should be trying to get to the truth about Julian Assange's role.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he's not being charged in the DNC hacking. He's being charged for something else.
Chelsea Manning stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, Pastor, let me show you.
Hey!
A neighborhood cat who adopted me. I started giving him catnip. And his name is Julian.
Hey, oh!
He's my Assange right here.
Oh, look at that. Wow, and it's a beautiful cat.
Yeah. I'm going to let him go. Okay.
Julian is your Assange. Wow.
Yeah,
well,
no, listen, I'm glad you brought up Julian Assange. I think it's a big travesty that's befallen on him personally. And it really shows the hypocrisy of the American news media, that they can call themselves journalists. It's a joke.
Yeah.
They should be rallying to his defense, and they're not. We've heard the numbers, we've heard the statistics, but then we try to kind of put it out of our minds. The statistics that 6 gigantic corporate conglomerates now own 90% of all of the TV, cable, radio, and print media in this country.
Yeah.
90%. So they're not real investigative journalists, and they haven't been for a while. All the surveys of journalists in this country and newspaper editors has shown that they themselves, when they answer these surveys, they admit to having less and less autonomy over their jobs, over what they write about.
Yeah, yeah.
if they want to keep their jobs working for a big corporate conglomerate, they're going to toe the party line, so to speak, or the corporate line, I should say.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And these big conglomerates are threatened by Julian Assange. The big corporate interests behind these conglomerates are threatened by this kind of radical transparency that Julian Assange stands for.
Yeah.
And when we talk about how do you end the corruption, there are very few tools that are left when you have a Congress that's essentially bought and paid for at the highest levels. When you've got so much corporate money influencing elections, you've got to count either on prosecutors to do their jobs, or you've got to have, a third estate. You've got to have journalists that are willing to publish the way WikiLeaks was publishing.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about these major companies that own stuff. And I also think about Operation Mockingbird. We were talking about it before. It's like they have planted people from the elites within the media. It's controlled. And real journalists like Julian Assange, they put them behind bars. And it's a shame. Tim, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. And thanks for coming on. It was an important day. Today, the world got to witness yesterday what happened in Iowa. And it just brings me back to what you experienced in Florida and the anger and the upset. And, I'm on the show today doing what I do. But one of the first things that I got involved with when I got deep into it was election integrity. And you've really kept that ball rolling. And I do appreciate you doing that, Tim. And even though a lot of people might not be listening now, one day they will be listening because it's the bedrock of our democracy in which the people, their vote must count because the will of the people must stand. You got anything else before we get you out of here, Tim?
Amen on that. Yeah. Safe travels to New Hampshire. I hope it's a good week.
Yeah, I hope we catch up with you when we get to Florida, Tim. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Tim Canova. You remember him from Florida, District 23, I believe, when he went against Debbie Wasserman Schultz in 2016 and 2018, and it was proved to be serious and huge election fraud. Just Google the name Brenda Snipes, and you can find out more. For Pasta Jardula of the Convo Couch, I'm here with Jonny Tsu. Join us back in a couple days. Fiorella will be back in town. We'll be on our way to New Hampshire. We are the family of the MCSC Network. If you haven't joined up for ROKFIN, ROKFIN, please do so. That's the spot where they help the content creators. They don't silence them, and they don't squeeze them for their dollars. Have a great day. Convo out.